Welcome back to Media7, where we're looking at the global Occupy movement and its media manifestations. Alistair Thompson, the spectre of the anti-capitalist protests of a decade or more ago, which seemed as if they had real momentum and then 9/11 happened, are the current occupiers thinking of themselves as the successors of those protests?
I think they didn't really know about them when I went down to talk.
Fascinating.
When I went down to see the ones in Wellington, because I think they were too young at the time. They were sort of 14, 15, maybe in their teens in the late 1990s. And the anti-capitalist protests of the 1990s they started in the Battle of Seattle, and after the Battle of Seattle there was May Day around the world, and there was mobilisations everywhere, quite similar to now, but they were very much protests. Back then we saw Nandor Tanjos and Sue Bradford on the battle lines in Melbourne against the Davos crowd, which has now retreated to Davos as a result of those protests. Julian Assange was there as well on the battle lines.
And is now sort of claiming credit for the Occupy movement too.
And he's pulling as an inspiration to them. Looking at the way they organise themselves, I mean, there's a very fascinating organisational dynamic, which you saw in the clip with the fingers and stuff, and the consensus decision-making processes. I think in Wellington, at least, they are hugely enjoying discovering this new ability to communicate with each other and to overcome problems together. Simple problems like where do we go to the toilet, where do we get the water, how do we cook the food, what do we do with our waste? How do we make sure that Celia Wade-Brown still likes us? And they're engaged in discussions about politics at the same time. It's a very, very different atmosphere.
Bernard, I thought one characteristic of the original anti-capitalist protest was that they were often incoherent in their goals and quite contradictory. You would have third world farmers marching alongside American steelworkers arguing for completely opposite things with regards to trade protection. Do you think this is going to become a problem for the Occupy movement? Because for so long as they don't have goals or demands, everyone can get along and be happy. But there are quite a few different strands in it, aren't there?
Yeah, one of the reasons the movement petered out in the early 2000s was the large surge in prosperity around particularly the developed world. As we know now, it was a false prosperity because it was bought with borrowed money. Unemployment fell. The problem, particularly in the States and in Europe, and potentially here too, is that unemployment, particularly youth unemployment, is stubbornly high and getting worse. And at the same time, you have these debts built up over the last decade and building up even faster, which creates an interesting intergenerational aspect to this protest, where you have the youth who are protesting know in their bones that the debts being built up right now, often in many cases to subsidise bankers, is something they will have to pay in 10, 20 years' time, particularly as the baby boomers, the parents, the ones who you could argue got everyone into this mess, will be claiming pensions and having to be paid for healthcare costs from the taxes that the youth of today are going to be paying when they get a job, if they get a job on any sort of decent income. And I think one of the reasons why it hasn't really taken off yet is that a lot of people a lot of youth haven't really worked out that they're being sold down the road by an older generation.
By the baby boomers. Blame everything on the baby
boomers.
Well,
who are deciding to essentially borrow more money and lump the debt on someone else so that they continue on with their lifestyle. And the classic point of this debate in New Zealand is the debate around the retirement age and whether it should be extended to 67.
And in your 9-point policy prescription for Occupy Aotearoa, that was what you suggested, raising the retirement age to 67. I do not think that is one of the things that they're talking about down at Civic Square in Wellington.
No, but when you ask them, what sort of taxes do you expect to pay in 10 to 20 years' time, and what will that tax money be used to pay for? And did you know, for example, that your Prime Minister said in Parliament a couple of weeks ago that he didn't care about the economic forecasts past 2025 because by then he'd be 65?
I think the protesters don't really think about these things at all. I think that they think the system is fundamentally broken and that all these old people are talking about levers and measures which are wrong. and that there has to be completely imaginative new solutions, and that's why they're not making demands. I mean, there's a constant straw man argument which is made in the response to you, where they say, you have to tell us what you would do. Well, you've had $7 trillion and the control on over the levers since 2008, and what have you done? And it hasn't fixed it. So if you don't know the answer, why should we trust you?
Because they're protesting an institutional failure of a generation who actually haven't come up with the ideas.
Yeah.
And where, if there were ideas, they're not getting through the system into policy making to fix the issue.
And Bryce Edwards of Otago University has suggested that we shouldn't be too worried about low voter enrolment amongst young people because they're discovering a new form of political engagement, direct action. Do you think he's right? I don't think the numbers are quite there.
I think what we're seeing in Occupy Wall Street, Occupy Aotearoa, and a whole lot of other things that are happening online is actually a new kind of politics. I think it's 21st century politics. It's not left-wing, right-wing. I think it's... a lot of young people are saying some quite simple things, in fact. They're saying, look, if 1% of the people have got 40% of the wealth in America, that is absolutely wrong. It doesn't work, you know. We just don't agree with that. We think that's totally unfair. Why should these people escape taxes and dump the burden on everybody else? We don't agree with it. We don't like the way that the environment is being trashed and wrecked because unfettered markets go out and do whatever they want to do. They cut costs and then you get, you know, shonky ships on reefs and so on. And the costs flow back to the ordinary people, the ordinary taxpayers, the people who live in these places. And if you listen, you know, I work with young people. I think that in New Zealand you've got a terrific young generation of people that do have clear views about the sort of world they want to live in. And they don't see the older generation creating it for them. And that makes them frustrated, it makes them feel powerless, it makes them feel utterly fed up. And actually, I think from the responses I've been getting, quite a lot of older people feel that way too.
I must say, without wanting to appear unduly cynical, it does strike me that a lot of the young people who said the same things and voted for values in New Zealand in 1972 ended up forming the ACT Party. We'll contemplate that. And that concludes our show for this week. Thanks to Dame Anne Salmon, Alistair Thompson and Bernard Hickey. And thanks to you for watching. Media7 will be back at the same time next week with a special show from Christchurch. Until then, goodbye.